In this video, we're going to do a deep dive in the ChemStat workbook, and this is one of the most important features and most used features in ChemStat because it stores all of your reports and graphs in a single place, and once you have added them to the workbook, they do not change. You have two options for the workbook display. There is this option, which is a docking view, and from the workbook menu, I can choose to not use the docking view and just have it a view up here where it is accessible in this tab. I find the docking view easier to use, so I dock it to the window. You can also resize it and move it around. There are 4 tabs. The Workbook tab has a list of items in the workbook. The Summary tab has a summary of items. The Advisor tab gives you information about the report that is currently displayed in ChemStat. And the Scripts tab has a list of all of your scripts. These are automated scripts that can run multiple reports at the same time. I'm going to go into each of these in detail except for the Scripts tab, which is discussed in another video. For any report, I can just do a right click and select Add to Workbook, and it appears in the workbook. I'm going to show you a graph as well. We'll just do a probability plot. Right click, Add to Workbook. You can see that the icons are different. A series of dashed lines is a report, and a little tiny graph is a graph. Let's look at another example. Here I have a Wilcoxon group comparison, and when I add it to the workbook, the icon is red, and that is because this report has statistical significance. And here's one more example. Here I have a Wilcoxon intra-well analysis. I add it to the workbook, and the icon is green. This report does not show statistical significance, so you can use the icon to indicate which reports in the workbook show statistical significance or do not. Blue indicates it is not a test for statistical significance. It is just a graph or report that shows information about your data. It could be something like just this list of concentrations, or it could be a normality test. This is basically any of the items from the distribution menu, although there are some exceptions. Let's look at the columns in the workbook. So I have the report title, the chemical parameter, the location ID, and it indicates whether it was all locations, a site-wide comparison, or a specific well, my data transformation, how I handled non-detects, and when the report was created. Let's talk about the transformation and how I handle non-detects. I can transform my data, and all of the reports that are open have all changed. They are now log transformed data. When I add them to the workbook, I get another item, log transform data. Once an item is added to the workbook, the data does not change. I can open an item from the workbook, and in this case, it is the original data. It is not transformed. If I go back to the original data in the open reports, my log transformed report from the workbook stays log transformed. And the same thing is true of how you're handling your non-detects. However, if I change the colors and fonts, then items in the workbook will be updated with the new colors and fonts. Now let's look at the Summary tab. Right now, I have 3 items in the workbook that indicate whether there is or is not statistical significance. If I go to the Summary tab, I have 3 items that indicate whether there is or is not statistical significance for specific wells. From the analysis menu, I'm going to add the kruskal-wallis method. And as we scroll down, you can see that it does individual well comparisons. And I'm going to add that to the workbook. So it is added here. And now I go to the Summary tab, and there are many more items. This is a summary for each well, for each report in the workbook, indicating whether that well has statistical significance or not, and the confidence level. So to clarify, some analyses, such as the Wilcoxon, only do an analysis for one well in an entire report. So in those cases, when you add one item to the workbook for the Wilcoxon, you're only going to get one entry in the summary table for the well on which that report was generated. Other analyses, such as the kruskal-wallis, will do multiple well analyses in a single report. So when you add a single kruskal-wallis report to the workbook, you're going to get a summary table entry for every well in that report. From the workbook menu, I can select Write Summary File, and this will write a tab-delimited text file of all of the data in the summary list. Now let's talk about how you get all of your data out of the workbook. Of course, you can print it. From the right-click menu, you have the ability to print the entire workbook or selected items. And if you want to print the entire workbook, you can print it to a PDF if your computer supports that. Also, on the workbook menu, you have the ability to export the workbook as rich text. However, this only exports reports. It does not export graphs. But you do have the option to export to Microsoft Word. And this will generate a Word document with all of the reports and the graphs. When you write your workbook to Microsoft Word, it is only going to write the items that are selected. So I want to go to Workbook, select All, and Workbook, Export to Microsoft Word. Now my Word document is being written. This might take some time. Let's see how the workbook works with scripts. I'm going to create a new script. And I'm going to add all of the parameters. And I'm just going to do a basic statistics analysis. I've cleaned out the workbook, so there are no other items. I'm going to execute the script. And now the workbook has a basic statistics report for every chemical parameter that I have. So the point is, anytime you run a script, the results of that script are added to the workbook. Let's look at one more feature of the workbook. From the scripts menu, I'm going to select Automatically Analyze Data. This gives me the ability to do a fully automated statistical analysis on all of my data. And I'm going to choose to analyze my data with an interwell ANOVA analysis. I click OK, and it is now running all of the scripts necessary to do a full analysis of the data. All of the results get added to the workbook. One thing to note is that many of the icons have a yellow background. That means that for some reason, the test was not appropriate for the data set. Usually, this has to do with the percentage of non-detects. It could also mean that there simply weren't enough data measurements to run the test. I can open this report, and if I go and look at the advisor window, it will tell me what was inappropriate about this test. The percentage of non-detects, 99%, exceeds the recommended value of 90% for this test. The results of the test may still be valid, or they may not. This is where some professional judgment comes in. Thanks for watching this video on how to use the workbook in ChemStat, and be sure to look for other videos on other topics.